Eve, thank you so much. We know it's 2 hours later where you are, and so I appreciate your taking your evening to be with us. And um, I'll turn over the mic to you.
Thank you, Jeff. It's very sweet to see Jeff in a different context from being the head of Zen Peacemakers International. I'm used to seeing him in that context with different faces and, you know. Um, so thank you for inviting me. Good evening to all of you. Let me start by, how do I start? Yeah, no, I do know how to start. I've been reading again the Vimalakirti Sutra, which is just a sensational, it's a very, very basic Mahayana Sutra that's really important. And in the 8th chapter, so you have all these Buddha's disciples, all the great ones, Manjusri and Makashyapa and all the people, Ananda, all the famous names you've heard of, who at first didn't want to come and visit this layman. And he's a layman. He's not considered a disciple, though, of course, by disciples, it's usually meant the monks who are there and who are really sitting hard with Shakyamuni Buddha to get enlightened. But Vimalakirti is a layman with a family and servants and big business and all that. And he's sick, and the Buddha sends his disciples to visit this man. They don't really want to, because they've had some funny experiences with him already. But they go, and they talk to him about all kinds of big Dharma questions that are, very basic to most of us, really. So in chapter 8, Manjusri says to Vimalakirti, "Noble sir, how does the Bodhisattva follow the way to attain the qualities of the Buddha? What is our way?" And Vimalakirti replied, "Manjusri, when the Bodhisattva follows the wrong way, he follows the way to attain the qualities of the Buddha." Meaning, when you follow the wrong way is how you're going to do it. And Manjusri says, how does the Bodhisattva follow the wrong way? What is that? And the rest of the chapter is all about that you go into the deadly sins and you go into the areas of avarice and anger and all these things that these people consider so impure. And Vimalakirti says, that's where you go. That's where you go if you want to follow the way of the Buddha. And there's a wonderful book I'm reading, I highly recommend, called this is Joan Sutherland's commentaries on the Vimalakirti, which is just magnificent. And I'm just going to read this. Vimalakirti walks the back streets and dark alleys of the city outside of which the Buddha is encamped. He's going places where many of the Buddha's disciples wouldn't, because they're afraid, as much for their spiritual as their physical safety. They think that to walk those streets, to see what you would see and engage with what you would engage with in those places, represents a threat to their deepest spiritual desire, which is to be released from this life between earth and sky, which to them seems the realm of great suffering. And they want to be relieved of great suffering, don't we all? Vimalakirti isn't afraid in that way. In fact, quite the opposite. His particular expression of Bodhisattva is willing to go anywhere and to extend a hand wherever it's possible to do so. And not only is he doing that, but it isn't bothering him. He's sick, and the sutra starts that Vimalakirti is sick, but he's not suffering. And that's an important distinction. And then she goes, I wonder what happened on his way through those difficult places. Did he catch tuberculosis? Was he beaten up? What might have been the proximate cause of his illness? Whatever happened doesn't translate into suffering because he's doing what he believes is the essential thing to do. The essential thing isn't to go out and deliberately throw himself in the path of getting sick or injured, but to accept that to be alive is to get dinged up. How many of us will make it through life without scars and antibodies, painful memories and regrets? The root of compassion is to understand that there's no escaping such things, only a question of how we acquire them in service to what? In service to what? So she's saying basically all those things that he encountered in the back alleys, they're inevitable for all of us. So we could just kind of we can run away and we can do all these things. Or we can accept that, oh, they're inevitable, and I'm going to experience it. And I'm going to go through all that and work with all that, but I'm going to do it for a specific purpose in fulfillment of a big vow. That is very different from just kind of passively accepting that that's what life is about. And then the question is, how is it that he doesn't suffer? How is it that he goes through all these things and he doesn't suffer? And I was thinking about that because just an hour ago, I was talking with our friend, Jeff Bridges. And we hang out quite a bit sometimes. And he reminisced about, he had been very sick. He had cancer. And because the immune system got so beaten up, he then got COVID, and he got COVID very badly and he almost died. So he was in the ICU for 6 weeks. And we talked about that. And what he said was that, of course, for the people watching him, like his wife, Sue, it was horrible to see somebody struggling for breath. Horrible, somebody in ICU can't get his breath. But for he himself, it wasn't so horrible. He didn't feel that he really suffered. He was, so inside it. So inside that he didn't suffer. His wife suffered, he says, more than he did. Of course, later when he got home, 60 pounds lighter and no hair and can't breathe and needs oxygen and had to get his strength back, that took months, that's something else. But when he was going through it, he didn't suffer. And I felt the same way about my husband, Bernie Glassman, because tomorrow would be Bernie's 83rd birthday had he lived, and he went through a major stroke that left half his body paralyzed. But it was really clear that when he was going through it, he was on the inside of it. He didn't seem to suffer very much. He didn't articulate that. He didn't show that. Me, going to the hospital every day, being at his side, seeing, oh my God, that scarred me. Just as Jeff's wife, Sue, was scarred watching it. But when you're in the inside, you don't get scarred. You don't suffer. So you're right in the center of the suffering, but you're not feeling that because you're in it. And that for me is what bearing witness is about. When you can be so in it, it's not external to you. It's not excluded. You're certainly not running away. You're right deeply in it. That's bearing witness. That's also what shikantaza is. If you're sitting doing shikantaza deeply, you're not aware you're doing shikantaza. You're just completely in it. And that's what bearing witness is. I remember once I met Cornel West. He's the African-American professor, a really interesting man, an activist. This is many years ago. And so I described bearing witness to him according to the Zen Peacemaker understanding. And I forget, I mean, he knows, I mean, I know he has a deeply Christian background, but I've already forgotten that background. And he said that in the Christian tradition, Jesus told his disciples to go out, the apostles, to go out and bear witness to his life. How do you bear witness to Jesus' life? By living like Jesus, by being it, not repeating his words, not copying his clothes, not copying his miracles or all that, being him. It's hard, I think, for most people, certainly this generation of practitioners, to understand that years ago, not that long ago, 30 years ago, going out into the back alleys of this world to connect with the poor, the hungry, the homeless, people who are excluded because of gender and because of racial and cultural issues, go into all that was considered a no-no for Zen Buddhists. I know it's hard to believe that, but believe me, that was the case. Very much like in Vimalakirti's time, you had these disciples who were the great close people to the Buddha, monks who had left their homes and everything, and they were considered the standard bearers of Buddhism. And they did not go down the back alleys of the city. They did not do any of that. They wanted an awakening experience like the Buddha. That was the goal. So actually, this was true for us too. When Zen came to the West, that was the big thing. We sit to have an experience of awakening, to awaken the world, to awaken to the fact that the world is one, but to actually experience that. Not to read about it, not to listen to talks about it, really experience it. That was what was very exciting and challenging to people. So Bernie Glassman was no different from anybody else. It's what he wanted. And he had two huge experiences that have been documented in other places. One was through working on the Koan Mu. He didn't work on that with his teacher, Maizumi. He worked on that with Maizumi Roshi's teacher, Koryu Roshi. And he had a huge breakthrough in that. And it was so big that he followed Koryu to Japan because he wanted to do more study with him. So he had that experience that so many of us want to have of the oneness of life. The second experience he had also came through a koan. But this is now a number of years later, after he's done hundreds and hundreds of them. And it's very interesting because as he told me, when he saw Maizumi Roshi for Dokusan, for what I called face to face, you never talk to Maizumi Roshi about your personal life, your personal challenges or issues in your family. You just didn't do that. You just stuck to the koan you were working on. In that particular time, something had happened with Bernie's sister, who he was very close to, and it troubled him greatly. So for the first time, maybe the last time, he actually went to see Roshi and he talked about that. And Maizumi Roshi, being Maizumi Roshi, didn't talk to him back about that. He said to him, "You remember that koan you worked on more than once about the source of Mu, the essence of Mu, the source of Mu? Do you remember that? Why don't you go back and do that again?" Okay, that's what he did. And as he worked on that, and he had worked on it before, he had a second huge experience of opening. And in this particular opening, he wrote that he saw all the hungry spirits in the world, needing, wanting, suffering, yearning. That's what he saw. And spontaneously, he vowed to feed them all. That was his big vow. He was going to feed them all. Now, after the first opening that he had, he became a fanatic in the Zendo. I wasn't there at the time, but I've heard many stories about what it was like to practice in the Zendo with Bernie at the Zen Center of Los Angeles. He yelled and he beat you when he yelled. You know, he did all the techniques that are written up in our Zen literature. He felt everybody should have that experience. After the second experience, he realized that he had vowed to feed and help everyone. If that's the case, how can he do it in the Zendo? How many people do you know come to Zendos? A fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 1%? I'm speaking world over. He didn't just speak about Los Angeles. His vow was to really feed everyone. And that's when he realized that in order to feed them, he too has to go where they are. He has to go into the back alleys. He has to go where they are, find the language to speak to them, which may not be Zen language, find the clothes, find the communication, find the ways to reach them. At that point in time, Zendos, if you think that, they've been accused of being very white middle class now, if you think they were middle class now, you should have seen them back then. I mean, they were as white as could be, and middle class and up. I mean, you had to do sashins, you had to be able to get away from your work and from your family. You had to be able to afford all that. If you had a very limited income, you couldn't do that. So how do you feed all these hungry spirits who can't afford any of that? And that's what took him out of the Zendo. Another way of looking at it is that he brought the Zendo into the streets. He himself never forgot his vow, and his goal always, from beginning to end, was always to help people awaken to the oneness of life. He did it in some very interesting and unconventional ways, unconventional upayas. So sometimes people didn't get what he was doing. But I had been with him 35 years till he died. And I can tell you from beginning to end, that was the only thing that mattered to him more than anything else. And in 1979, he came to New York. He left ZC and he came to New York. And he had a board meeting. And he had some well-known people in the board. They were already then well-known, like Peter Matheson, and people who were going to become well-known afterwards. And he laid out his idea of what the Zen community of New York, which really became the Zen Peacemakers, were going to do. He said, we're going to establish a strong sitting practice. We're going to have a seminary for study. We're going to earn money. We're going to work as a business. And we're going to do social action. We're going to do a lot of interfaith work because that is so essential for peacemaking. That is what we're going to do. Those minutes I have downstairs from 1979, he's laying out his vision for the group that was to become the Zen Peacemakers. I joined it 6 years later in 1985. And they're all saying, oh, that's nice. That's nice. I don't know how seriously they took it. Or maybe because they were all liberals, they thought, well, that's a nice thing to do. I don't think anybody had a clue how deeply he was going to take us into those worlds, into the world of the back alleys. Now, sometimes people They know that Bernie, well, he went when he turned 55. He went and did um, he went to the Capitol, and in the middle of January, freezing weather, he and a group of people sat in front of the Capitol. He was wondering what he was going to do for his next steps, and he decided to form the Zen Peacemaker Order. And people think that he was going to, that he was going to do that, and he had these three basic teachings already in place: not knowing, bearing witness, and loving action, or what we call the action that comes out of, not knowing and bearing witness. But that's not the case at all. I remember when he articulated those three, first time I heard it. That was later. That was after he made the vow to start ZPO. That came out of lived experience. That came of how he built Greyston. That came out of the way he fulfilled the vision that was set up in those minutes in 1979. And I can tell you specifically what that was about. I can tell you that, yes, we had this big mansion in this well-to-do area, Riverdale, and we had this beautiful zendo, and we sat there and we did sashins there and we studied. And then I can say that we got involved and started a bakery, which was a business, highly mismanaged for a long time. And that went on. And then after that, we got into social action, and we got a contract with Ben & Jerry's to do their ice cream, baked goods for all their ice cream. And that enabled us to hire people from the neighborhood to train them. Then we got into building housing for homeless families, and then a childcare center, even for infants as old as as young as 6 weeks. There were very few of those, because of the ratio of staff you need to infants at that age. Then we got into building housing for people with AIDS when the AIDS epidemic struck, and a whole big day center for people with AIDS that was one of the first in the country offering alternative therapies, and the community gardens. So I can give you that whole history. But the way that leads to the Zen Peacemakers, said the Zen Peacemaker Order, is that frankly, it was a mess. I have a blog, and I blogged about making a mess today. And, sometimes people think, oh, he sat there and he came up with these three teachings, and that's how it came about. And I can tell you, it came out of being in the mess, being in those back streets. And that rather than things kind of going nicely in some nice trajectory, they went like this, and 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 they went every which way but up. Our development was like a broken zipper. You know how when a zipper works well, you go, and it goes up. But when the zipper doesn't work well because it's a little broken, it kind of you jerk it like this, and then you jerk it like that, and then you jerk it like this, and you jerk it like that. So this was a community that didn't have anybody particularly talented. I would say half of us were artists. We were not business people. We were not social love activists. We really didn't have anything like that. We had no business background for the most part. But basically, it's like you plunge into not knowing. So you let go of who you think you are, what you think your strengths are, what you think your weaknesses are. When I look at spiritual activists now, I think our biggest problem is what we think of ourselves and what we think we can accomplish. And most of us say, no, I can't do this, or I can't do that, I can do that. And, no, he can. Martin Luther, King could, he could. And Burgley Glassman could, but me, I can't. And we, kicking and screaming, had to go right into not knowing and saying, well, I really thought I was a writer and that, but, and that's all I could do. I could write, that's all I could do. But no, I got to take orders for cakes. We had people who trained as bakers who had never baked a thing in their lives. We got to manage a business. We got to clean around our neighborhood that is surrounded by crack needles. That was at the height of the crack epidemic. We had to slowly and painfully sometimes let go. This is my favorite mood drop. Rather than holding things tight like this, you don't have to let it go completely. You don't have to let go of your name, your history, the story of your life, of your family. No, but just hold it a little lighter, a little looser. That's all. That's all we're asking to do. You don't have to go like this, but don't go like this. Go like this. That for me is not knowing. And having done that, now you're just bearing witness. What's needed? What's going on? Oh, I see. So we have a bakery, but how do we bring in people who have no skills? How do we bring in people who are unemployed and are all around a bakery and can't hold on to any job? What do they need? How do we bring them on? What skills do they need? That taught us what kind of training programs we needed. Then we decided that we would build apartments for homeless families in a county that had the highest per capita rate of homelessness at that time, and that hadn't built apartments, never mind affordable apartments, hadn't even built apartments for like 10, 20 years. But if we do that, how are people going to pay for it? They need jobs. They need childcare. They need after school programs for their kids. And all this came out of being in the dirt, being in the grit, out of doing, not out of sitting back and saying, oh my God, all this is going to be done. This and this and this and this and this and this. Well, forget about it. I'm not going to do it. It's the way some people look at the climate issues nowadays and say, look at what a huge thing this is. How are we ever going to do this? If we'd started like that, we'd have done nothing, and there'd have been no Zen peacemakers. But we didn't. All we did was start with one thing. We just started cooking in this big shelter that existed then in Yonkers. And then that led to this, and that led to this, and that led to this. Always out of not knowing, bearing witness. And now, oh, I see, now we need to do this. Now we need to do that. Oh, I see. Now there's an AIDS epidemic and there's no housing for people with AIDS. Now, oh, we need therapists for the kids, because some of these people who have been homeless, they really need a lot of counseling services. A lot of the mothers who've been homeless, they don't have a clue about budgets, how to stay within their income. Question is, how do they develop an income? How do they do jobs? But all this was from taking step by step by step and being there. That was the single most important thing. And I want to say a little bit about bearing witness and about what it is to be there. Sometimes we think, we from our comfortable distance, most of us look at, let's say, I'll talk about street people, about homeless people. We look at people on the streets. This is terrible. This is terrible, and I can't stand to look at it. I'll give him $1. I'll give him a couple of dollars. But it so hurts for me to look at it. I can't even really talk with these people. So Bernie started doing street retreats in 1991. And he felt, and I remember that Peter Matheson was on that first one. I wasn't with him at the time. I was really annoyed by that whole retreat. I thought it was slumming. And he and I used to argue about it a lot till I finally gave in and joined. And then I thought it was amazing. But when you go on the streets, what you see is that when you're okay, and you're not homeless, nobody's saying you're homeless, believe me, but you're on the streets, you're leading a streets life for 5 days. You have no money, you have no ID, you just have the clothes, on your back. You're not supposed to bring a change of clothes. You don't bring sleeping bags. You don't do any of that. You're going to use the ingredients of the street and live on the streets, just like street people. And what you discover is that there is a lot more ease in that than you ever realized standing outside and looking in. It's not what you thought it was when you were out there passing a homeless person and thinking, this is terrible, Gewalt. How could they be lying on cartons like that? They know very well how to live on the streets. They would always give us advice on what we needed to know. Where was the best food? Where could you sleep where the police won't bother you? They had all this inside knowledge. They had all these skills, and some of them had a lot of joy of life. It felt different being on the inside than being on the outside. And if you were to ask me what is distinctive about the Zen Peacemaker Order, I would say it's that it pushes you to be on the inside. I remember a friend of mine who was a photographer and a writer, and he used to go to some very, very deep in places in Africa where very few people ever went. And especially he was concerned about mining operations that are there and that they keep away all journalists, all outsiders, because they basically enslave the local population to work those mines. And he would come back with a lot of writing and photos. And he once showed me a photo of kids playing, soccer, only they didn't have a ball. So they had something scrunched up together and they put it in a piece of fabric, tied it together, and that was their soccer ball. And he showed me this photo of these little African kids wearing rags and everything, playing in this way. And I kind of looked at it and I must have groaned or something like that. And he said, what are you groaning about? These kids were having a great time playing soccer. You see, he had been there. He had seen that it didn't matter what the ball looked like or that they were in rags. They didn't care. They were having a good time playing soccer. That's what it means being on the inside. It doesn't mean you don't help them. It doesn't mean you don't try to end those kind of mining operations as he did. It doesn't mean you don't end homelessness. It doesn't mean any of that, but you're on the inside. That's what bearing witness is. And that for me is what the Zen Peacemakers continues to be. And those are its fairly unique elements. So let's see. And those, I don't know if anybody here was ever at our Auschwitz retreat in Poland, but it's a horrible place to go to. And what is always amazing to people is how you come out of that, like you come out of street retreats, deeply inspired and encouraged and feeling a lot of energy. I've known many people who changed their lives very drastically after that retreat. And it wasn't because they were depressed or anything like that. You come home and people commiserate and say, oh, poor you. You were on the streets for 5 days and you didn't have your bedroom and you didn't have your home. You were in that terrible camp, killing camp. And oh my God, how depressing. And it's hard to explain to people that no, that isn't what happens. That happens when you're on the outside looking in. But when you're ready to go inside, you 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 find joy and life in a way you never did. And what you realize, if you've done it enough, is how much energy we use up in our lives to hold on to our identities and to how we think and who we are and our way of understanding and processing life. We use up so much energy in holding up those walls and not going into the back alleys. And when you're thrown, and that's what Bernie did, he threw people into those situations back, whether they were Greyston and Yonkers and doing things they'd never done in their lives, whether it was going to a death camp in Poland, whether it was going to Rwanda and seeing skeletons lying on the beds there. And a name will come back to me. Or on the streets, when kicking and screaming, I was kicking and screaming going on the streets 5 years after he started. And you realize how much you've built up to protect yourself. And how if you could just go into that and bear witness, you find so much life and energy. And that's why Vimalakirti is not suffering when he goes down those back alleys. So obviously I could write 10 books about all this, but I won't. I'll open this up to questions. We have 15 minutes according to my computer clock. It'll announce 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, that's my computer. So please, what makes this interesting, Bernie always loved discussion. At the end, he didn't like to talk, but he loved discussion. So please, comments, questions, disagreements, all those are great.
Yeah, welcome everybody to go ahead and unmute. If you've got something, go ahead and just wave your hand and unmute.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I was wondering if you could spell the name of the sutra again.
Better than that. This is Robert Thurman's. Oh, can you see it?
Yeah.
So it's Vimalakirti. It's the Holy Teachings of Vimalakirti. And the book by Joan Sutherland, which I really, which I think is great, is Vimalakirti and the Awakened Heart. Can you see this? Oh, here you are. The Vimalakirti and the Awakened Heart. I really recommend it. She writes beautifully.
Thanks, Eve. Thanks for the question, Joel. Anyone else? A question? Yoshin.
You've talked about bearing witness, but ZPI also has plunges, and I'm wondering, we've been having this discussion between Jeff and Holden and I. What's the difference between bearing witness and plunge?
Yeah, not much. Not much. So the word, I don't remember how the word plunge came, but you can imagine it. You plunge, you take a dive, you plunge into water. You don't go and do what I do when I go into water, which is I go tiptoe in, get my foot, wet, then I get my lower legs wet, then I tiptoe a little more and I get the upper legs wet. No. You jump into the water, you plunge in. Because when you plunge, let's say and the water's cold, you go, ooh. See, that's bearing witness. Bearing witness is when it hits you so hard that it breaks through your attachments and identification. So a plunge is designed to break, to bear witness, sometimes to shock you, either because of cold water. Usually go to Auschwitz, the first day is pretty shocking. So it's designed to shock you because it's breaking through those fixed ideas of ours that hold us captive. You see what I mean? So a plunge is the kind of retreat that's designed to do that. Now, sessions are plunges, but most of us, some of us are able to go right in fairly quickly, boom, then it's a plunge. Some of us, and I include myself in that, can take days, and we do it slowly. We get our feet wet, and then our ankles wet, and our shins and our knees, till we finally get in deep. But all those are plunges. And in a plunge, you're bearing witness, whether you realize it or not. That's when you're sitting. If you're really sitting, you're bearing witness. You're on the inside, because there's no inside outside, of course. There's just that.
Thanks for that answer, Eve, and thanks for your question, Yoshi. That's really a great question. Anybody? Colorado, Yoshi.
Eve, thank you for that wonderful talk. It was really powerful and such a useful reminder about our practice and about life in general. Yeah, very, very, very powerful. So many things I related to. I actually met your husband in I spent a little bit of time through Nancy Mujo Baker. I was a student of hers at Sarah Lawrence in '82.
Ah.
And I spent some time at the Greyston Bakery and in the Zendo there in Riverdale. But I guess what you mentioned that is powerful for me was the Auschwitz experience. I also after the Berlin Wall fell, I spent some time living in Czechoslovakia for a year, and I ended up going to Auschwitz twice. And I haven't really thought about it, but it really, like you said, it really felt like a plunge and shocking. And I remember after leaving the camp, that sense of being shocked out of your old way of being is definitely right on the money. I wasn't part of any retreat when I went. I went by myself, but I didn't look at the world the same after that. And a lot of it is recognizing the power of community and responsibility for those around you, and being so human. And that experience, it felt like a plunge. And you come out the other end of it with a new perspective, that's for sure. So thank you for reminding me of that.
Thanks, Myoshin. Arthur, hi.
Yeah, on this topic of plunge and shock, it really reminds me of these oranges that were left in my refrigerator for like 2 or 3 months, and they had gotten extremely moldy, like not just a little bit, but I mean, they were covered. And even looking at it, I was just kind of taken aback. I was like, wow, I've never really seen anything like this. What is this? What is going on here? But none of that prepared me for when I opened it up. And the smell, whoosh, like it was just all the orangeness that I could ever smell in my whole life. And at least in that moment, and I feel like in a way there's some kind of relationship to what we're talking about now, about just being shocked with your senses and really just being totally consumed in the moment and in whatever it is that's in front of me. And what was in front of me was this like mold growth and this like very powerful smell. And I just, yeah, there wasn't really any understanding of it. It was just an experience.
Thank you for that. So you see, and that's also true from Colorado, Myoshin. And by the way, I'm very happy to meet the other Myoshin whom I've never met before and works as a peacemaker. So I'm glad to meet you. But the point that you're making now is, or what's bringing it up for me is, most people, if you're opening the refrigerator and you see that your oranges got all green or whatever, or black or whatever, they won't even look at it again. The disgust comes up so quickly that you immediately get rid of it. What you did was something else. You actually kept it in front of you and said, oh, like, I think you may not have said it, but what is this? Let me investigate it. I'm not going to right away get rid of it. That's what people want to do all the time. And talking about Auschwitz, I mean, I've seen so many people go in and out of that camp over many years that I've been there. Most of them just want to look away. They're like tourists. They come in, they see something terrible, and they really just want to get out. They'll see a couple of designated places that everybody knows about, and then they just want to get out. The thing about our retreat at Auschwitz is we stay there for 5 days. It's very different from a short visit. And you're looking at your oranges rather than immediately tossing them. You're suddenly looking at something and it's like something new. And you're not letting your senses, pull you away. Life is so wild. Life is so outrageous. And we're always trying to kind of fit it into some squares and say, oh, this is what I can tolerate. This is what's nice. But life is so much crazier than that. So when you could look at oranges, and I can't imagine what they look like after 2 months, black and stinky and the smell and all that, wow. But that's life. That's life. And it's really great that you were able to actually go with it and even investigate it and open it up and say, I thought this was an orange, but maybe it's not an orange anymore. What is this? Yeah, that's great. That's a plunge. In its own way, that's a plunge. And we're all faced with these things all the time. And we're starting to, and if we do this often enough and you practice, you really catch yourself when you're jerking away from something, from a person, from a fruit, from an animal, from the freezing weather we have now in Massachusetts. You catch yourself. You don't want to live it. You don't want to live life. I want to make it nice. I want to make it so my senses can deal with it. That's not bearing witness. And that's not knowing. That's living according to knowing. And that's living small.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eve. We have 3 more minutes. Gakyo. Yeah, hi.
Good evening. Thank you for being with us and being late in the evening for you. I was just, when Arthur brought up his question, I had just seen something in the New York Times about disgust. And it talked about how disgust and repulsion have an evolutionary value, was the premise of this article, and that we learn what we need to protect ourselves from when we feel repulsion of something we see, and you're talking about the complete opposite, and that we are more likely to evolve by encountering it. And I don't know if there's really a question there, but what do you think of that? What does it bring up for you?
It brings up for me that I'm not eating those oranges that have been in the refrigerator for 2 months. You know, yeah, I'm not eating them. I'm not telling anybody to eat them. I'm not telling us all to lose our homes and become homeless. I'm not telling us all to go get killed or massacred in some terrible way. I'm not saying that. I'm aware that our mind and our six senses have helped us evolve and have helped us survive. But there's a price that we've paid also. And I don't think we need to constrict ourselves to such an extent, because as of this moment, they've helped us evolve. But towards what? What are we facing now? Have they really helped us evolve? At a certain level, yes. But I think that what we're facing now is a need to look much wider and to just loosen that tightness with which we hold on to good and bad and evil and this and disgusting and delightful. And I'm not saying to go and let it all go. All I'm saying is to loosen that up. So just like, I'm sorry, Arthur.
It's 9 o'clock.
Arthur, by 9 o'clock. Just like Arthur was able to loosen up that, that natural tendency to disgust. He didn't say he went and ate the darn thing. He just said, I can look at it. Wow, I can even open it up. Well, look at here. Isn't that interesting? That's the practice. The practice isn't to commit suicide or to stop surviving. The practice is to open up and to just go into not knowing and let go of that deep attachment and become more open to see, oh, what else is there? What else is there? Okay, I think it's time for sitting, huh?
Thank you, Eve. Arthur, if it's really, really quick, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that after that experience and sharing it with Amy likes to call me into the room if we've ever left anything in the refrigerator too long and ask if I want to look at the mold.
It's a regular practice for us now, and a really good one too. Like, oh, there's new life growing here in our fridge.
Thank you, everybody. I wish we had more time. Eve, we're going to sit for about 25 minutes. You are invited, and we would love to have you stay and sit with us. We also know that it is 9 o'clock, as your machine just told us. And if you need to go, that's okay as well. What would you prefer?
I plan to sit.
Wonderful. Thank you.